For this video, there's going to be sources in the comments. So if you would like to look at any of the research that I have taken a look at and gathered for the making of this video, they will be in the comments and they will be linked. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to be going over the worst things Biden did during his presidency, as I'm sure you saw in the title. It is really late at night while I'm recording this, so I may fall asleep in the middle of recording. No, I'm just kidding. I wouldn't do that. It would be funny though. All right, most people think a president's moral record is just a single judgment call, good or bad, but it is actually made up of multiple moving parts, like a Walmart self-checkout, but somehow with more casualties. You might see the chaos in Kabul, the deaths at the southern border, or the devastation in Gaza, and they can feel like separate stories at first. But when you look closer, they are all different expressions of the exact same system. Stated values about dignity and safety, with the same things happening with familiar habits of power, security, and political calculation. In this video, you are going to be looking at 5 ways Biden's presidency shows that system in the real world. By the end, you'll be able to spot the pattern anytime a leader talks about compassion while making choices that expose people with the least power to the most harm. The chaotic Afghanistan exit and abandoned obligations. This is where Biden's promise to end forever wars runs straight into the moral duty to people who trusted the United States. It turns out that forever wars ended, but the consequences got renewed for another season, I guess. It happened because the administration locked itself into a rapid, deadline-driven withdrawal from Afghanistan, which left little room to protect civilians and local partners. That choice led to scenes of panic and preventable death. You might notice this in images from August 2021, desperate Afghans crowding Kabul airport, some chasing and clinging to a U.S. Air Force plane, and then falling to their deaths as it took off, according to NPR reporting. A suicide bombing at the airport killed 13 U.S. service members and many Afghan civilians, according to NPR. The Republican-led House Foreign Affairs Committee later argued that the United States abandoned Afghan allies to Taliban reprisal killings, and said the episode damaged America's credibility, according to a 2025 committee report. Not that credibility was exactly pristine going in, but sure, let's damage it a little bit more. Analysts at the Brookings Institution described the White House's own post-mortem on the withdrawal as disingenuous and say it sidestepped real accountability for how the evacuation was planned and executed. From a moral standpoint, the mechanism here is simple. When speed, optics, and political promises outrank concrete duties to specific people, those people become expendable. Sanctions and financial pressure that deepened Afghan suffering. Here, the same system works through economics instead of images on the nightly news. After the troops left, the United States and its partners kept broad financial sanctions and asset freezes on Afghanistan. Legal and public health scholars argue these measures behaved like de facto comprehensive sanctions, even though they were described as targeted. They basically slapped a GPS tracker on the whole country and still called it surgical. The cause is a familiar mechanism. Washington tries to punish or isolate a regime while claiming the tools are precise and humane, but in practice, they hit the wider population first. A 2024 analysis of U.S. sanctions on Afghanistan argues that the post-withdrawal sanctions structure helped drive economic collapse and food insecurity, turning a policy that succeeded in applying pressure on the Taliban into what the authors call a catastrophic outcome for ordinary Afghans. You feel the moral weight of this when you realize that Afghan families who had nothing to do with Taliban decisions faced unemployment, hunger, and failing public services because their entire economy was effectively being choked off. The system behavior here is quiet but brutal. Nobody has to sign an order saying, "Let children go hungry." but the combination of sanctions, frozen assets, and slow relief often leads there anyways. From a moral standpoint, it shows you how easy it is for leaders to talk about human rights while relying on tools that predictably harm civilians first. Keeping harsh border policies that cost migrant lives. In this case, Biden's system of orderly immigration serves to protect domestic political comfort at the cost of migrant safety. It works by continuing and defending policies like Title 42, a pandemic-era rule that allowed border agents to quickly expel asylum seekers without giving them the usual chance to seek protection, according to summaries from the ACLU and immigration lawyers, which is just speedrunning human rights violations. A federal district court ruled in 2021 that Title 42 expulsions were likely unlawful, but the Biden administration appealed to keep using the policy. According to the ACLU's litigation timeline, immigrant rights groups say Title 42 effectively shut down asylum at the southern border and pushed people into more dangerous routes as they tried to reach safety or reunite with family. The human cost of this deterrence logic is stark. In an interview citing data from the Missing Migrants Project, NPR reported that 2021 was the deadliest year on record for migrant deaths in the Americas and at the U.S.-Mexico border since at least 2014. Human Rights Watch states that more than 850 people died while crossing the border in one fiscal year under the Biden administration, often while trying to seek protection or support family, according to its 2023 statement on deterrence policies. When you watch this system play out, you see how tough border policies can make death and disappearance feel like an unfortunate side effect instead of what they really are: predictable results of channeling desperate people into more lethal terrain. Continuing arms transfers during the Gaza war. Sometimes Biden's commitment to alliances can lead to moral blind spots around civilian protection. This is triggered by a mechanism where the United States treats arms sales to close partners as almost automatic, even when evidence mounts that those weapons are being used in ways that violate humanitarian law. Amnesty International USA reports that U.S. supplied weapons were used by Israeli forces in Gaza in serious violations of international humanitarian and human rights law, and it calls for an immediate suspension of arms transfers. A coalition of 25 humanitarian and human rights organizations wrote to Biden in September 2024, saying his continued military assistance to Israel was shockingly out of step with the realities of civilian harm and suffering in Gaza, and warning that ongoing transfers risk making the United States complicit in war crimes, according to their public letter. The International Court of Justice has found that the risk of genocide in Gaza is plausible, according to Amnesty International USA's summary of the court's provisional measures order. At the same time, Biden updated U.S. arms transfer policy to say that countries more likely than not to commit serious abuses among U.S. weapons should not receive them. But critics note that he has continued major transfers to Israel despite mounting reports of civilian casualties, according to reporting in the New York Times. Apparently, the export is democracy. I guess. You can see the system behavior here. The stated role is that protecting civilians is a red line, but in practice, strategic ties and political pressure make the red line very flexible, and ordinary families in Gaza pay the price with their lives. Finally, preaching empathy while normalizing these trade-offs. Finally, Biden changes how moral trade-offs feel by pairing them with a strong public narrative of empathy. Psychological research on his first 100 days in office describes him as a comforter-in-chief, whose life story of grief and loss helps him connect with people in pain and adopt a conciliatory style. Basically, the guy who gives a really good hug while signing something horrifying in the next room. That personal story can make it feel natural when he speaks about the soul of America, about restoring dignity, or about mourning national tragedies. It creates a loop where many people start from the assumption that his choices must be compassionate, which makes the harm of sanctions, border deaths, or armed transfers almost invisible until you focus on them directly. At the same time, human rights groups and policy analysts point out that his administration's decisions in Afghanistan, at the border, and in Gaza have imposed intense suffering on people who had little say in the risks being taken in their name. Human Rights Watch describes deaths at the southern border as having skyrocketed under deterrence policies. Amnesty International USA documents unlawful attacks in Gaza with US made weapons. In sanctions, scholars argue that Afghanistan's post withdrawal sanctions regime helped produce famine level conditions. When you put those critiques next to the empathy heavy rhetoric, you start to see a consistent pattern: compassion in speeches, continuity in systems that tolerate high civilian costs. Looking at these 5 examples, you can see the common thread is a system where expressive empathy sits on top of familiar tools of state power, military withdrawal on a deadline, broad sanctions, deterrence-based border policy, and near automatic support for allies, even when those tools carry heavy, predictable costs for civilians. It is not just a list of random mistakes. It is different expressions of the same underlying pattern in which the US government says human life and dignity matter, but still treats certain groups, Afghan civilians, migrants, Palestinians, as acceptable collateral in the pursuit of stability, security, or domestic political safety. Like a moral tier list where some people are stuck in the unplayable class. The system works because it subtly shifts how you and the broader public respond to information. You hear about tragedy as a byproduct of hard choices, instead of as a signal that the moral framework itself might be flawed. But the same structure can look very different depending on the context. If you focus only on the surface outcomes, the images from Kabul, a single record-breaking year of border deaths, or one horrific strike in Gaza, Biden's moral record may seem scattered and unpredictable. If you focus on the mechanisms, the decisions, the sanctions, the deterrence at the border, and the loyalty to allies, even when there's warnings, you see that his presidency is actually quite consistent. It often protects established systems first and vulnerable people second. Now, to get into how to use this when you judge leaders. Next time you see Biden or any president talk about morality, do not just look at the result in isolation. Ask yourself, which of these 5 patterns is happening right now? A rushed promise that leaves people exposed, economic pressure that hits civilians, deterrence that pushes people into danger, support for an ally despite civilian harm, or empathy-heavy language that makes the trade-offs feel softer. You do not need to memorize the list. You only need to recognize the system. Once you see that pattern, you are not just watching a speech about values, you are understanding how real moral choices are being made and who is carrying the weight of those choices on the ground. Essentially, reading the patch notes for an empire instead of watching the trailer. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, and only if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. And if you're feeling up to it, go ahead and share, maybe even leave a comment, do something like that. Go fight for your rights and fight for other people's rights. I hope you come back to watch another video. Goodbye.